Dear Mr. Jackson, I'm writing this letter from somewhere in Kuwait. I don't know if I'll survive tomorrow. We lost 3 men yesterday. The sand is everywhere in our food, in our wounds, in our nightmares. But every night, when the bomb stopped for a few hours, I put on my Walkman and listened to Man in the Mirror. Your voice is the only thing keeping me human out here. The only thing reminding me that there's a world beyond this hell, where people still dance, still sing, still believe in something beautiful. If I make it home, I have one dream: to meet you, to shake your hand, to tell you that your music saved my life in ways you'll never understand. Sincerely, Private First Class Jason Miller, US Army, 3rd Infantry Division. Peace. I'm 22 years old. I hope I get to turn 23. That letter arrived at Neverland Ranch in February 1991. Michael Jackson read it 17 times. He kept it in his jacket pocket for months, carrying it with him everywhere, to recording sessions, to rehearsals, to late night walks through his private zoo. Something about those words, written in shaky handwriting on military issue paper, haunted him in ways he couldn't explain. But when Jason Miller finally came home 6 months later, he wasn't the same soldier who wrote that letter. The boy who dreamed of dancing had lost both legs to a landmine 3 weeks before the war ended. The army gave him a medal, the doctors gave him a wheelchair, and everyone told him his dancing days were over. Everyone except Michael Jackson. What happened when Michael finally met Jason, when he looked at that wheelchair and said, "Dance with me," would prove that sometimes the music doesn't come from your legs. It comes from your soul. And souls don't need legs to dance. Jason Miller grew up in a small town in Ohio called Millbrook, population 3,200. His father worked at the steel mill until it closed in 1985. His mother worked double shifts at the local diner to keep food on the table. They didn't have much money, but they had a radio that played constantly, and Jason fell in love with music before he could walk. By age 7, Jason had memorized every Michael Jackson song on the radio. By age 10, he taught himself the moonwalk by watching MTV through the window of the electronics store downtown. His family couldn't afford a television. By age 15, he was the best dancer in Millbrook High School, winning every talent show, dreaming of somehow making it to a real stage. But dreams cost money, and the Miller family didn't have any to spare. When Jason graduated high school in 1988, he had 2 choices: work at the new chicken processing plant that had replaced the steel mill, or join the army. The recruiter promised travel, adventure, college money. Jason signed up the day after graduation, believing the military would be his ticket to a bigger life. He never imagined that bigger life would include a war. Operation Desert Storm began in January 1991. Jason's unit, the 3rd Infantry Division, was among the first deployed to Kuwait. Nothing in basic training had prepared him for what he found there. The endless desert, the brutal heat, the constant fear, the friends who were alive one moment and gone the next. Jason was 22 years old, and he was watching people die. The only thing that kept him sane was his Walkman, a cheap Sony model he'd bought at a PX store before deployment. The batteries were always running low. The single cassette tape, Michael Jackson's Bad album, was wearing thin from being played hundreds of times. But every night, when the bombing stopped and the desert fell into an eerie silence, Jason would put on his headphones and disappear. Man in the Mirror became his lifeline. 4 minutes and 55 seconds of escape. 4 minutes and 55 seconds of remembering that somewhere beyond this hell, people still danced, still sang, still believed in beautiful things. It was during one of those nights, huddled in a foxhole while tracers lit up the sky, that Jason wrote the letter to Michael Jackson. He never expected anyone to actually read it. He certainly never expected a response. He just needed to tell someone, anyone, that their art mattered, that it was saving him. That music could reach into the darkest places and pull someone back from the edge. Jason folded the letter, addressed it to Michael Jackson, Neverland Ranch, California, USA, and dropped it in the military mail. Then he went back to surviving, one day at a time, one song at a time. March 3rd, 1991. 3 weeks before the Gulf War officially ended, Jason's unit was on patrol in southern Iraq, clearing a route that intelligence said was safe. The morning was quiet. Too quiet, some of the veterans said. But orders were orders, and they kept moving. Jason was walking point, scanning the sand for anything unusual, when his world exploded. The landmine had been buried just beneath the surface. Invisible, patient, waiting for someone exactly like Jason to step on it. He never saw it, never heard it. 1 second he was walking, the next he was flying through the air, and then everything was red and screaming, and a pain so massive his brain couldn't process it. He remembers the smell most vividly: burning flesh, his own flesh, mixed with sand and smoke and something metallic that he later realized was blood. Then everything went black. Jason woke up in the army hospital in Landstuhl, Germany. 3 days later, the first thing he did, before opening his eyes, was reach for his legs. His hands found nothing. Just bandages. Just absence. Just the end of everything he'd ever dreamed of. The doctors explained it clinically: bilateral above-knee amputation. The landmine had destroyed both legs below the knee, and the field surgeons had been forced to amputate higher to save his life. He was lucky, they said. Lucky to be alive. Lucky the medic had reached him so quickly. Lucky the helicopter had gotten him to surgery in time. Jason didn't feel lucky. He felt like someone had stolen his future and left him with nothing but a wheelchair and a medal he never wanted. For weeks, he refused to speak, refused to eat more than necessary, refused to participate in physical therapy. The army psychiatrist diagnosed depression, which seemed laughably inadequate to describe the black hole that had opened up inside him. His mother flew to Germany to be with him. She held his hand. She told him everything would be okay. She said he could still have a good life, still find happiness, still do meaningful things. But every time she said those words, Jason thought about dancing, about the moonwalk he'd practiced for years, about the way music used to move through his body like electricity, about the dreams that had kept him alive in Kuwait, dreams that required legs he no longer had. What was the point of surviving if you couldn't dance? Meanwhile, at Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson was reading Jason's letter for the 37th time. Something about those words wouldn't let him go. The rawness, the honesty, the way this young soldier had reached across thousands of miles to say that music mattered, that art could save lives, that beauty existed even in the ugliest places. Michael had received thousands of fan letters over the years, had read stories of how his music had helped people through difficult times. But this letter was different. This letter felt like a lifeline thrown from a drowning man. When news of the war's end reached Neverland, Michael made some calls, asked his team to find out what had happened to Private First Class Jason Miller, 3rd Infantry Division. The answer came back 2 weeks later, and it broke Michael's heart. The soldier who had written about dancing, about surviving on music and dreams, had lost both legs, was currently at Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C., was refusing treatment for depression, was, according to one nurse who spoke off the record, slowly giving up on life. Michael made a decision that his managers thought was crazy. His publicist thought was pointless. His accountants thought was a waste of resources. He was going to bring Jason Miller to Neverland Ranch, and he was going to teach him that dancing didn't require legs. The invitation arrived at Walter Reed in August 1991. Jason's mother opened it because Jason wasn't opening anything anymore. She read it 3 times before she believed it was real. "Dear Jason," it began, "I received your letter from Kuwait. I've read it many times. Your words about music keeping you human in hell, they stayed with me. They reminded me why I do what I do. I was sorry to hear about your injuries, but I don't believe your dancing days are over. I believe they're just beginning in a different way. Please come to Neverland Ranch. Let me show you what I mean. The music isn't in your legs, Jason. It never was. It's in your soul, and your soul is still whole. Your friend, Michael Jackson." Jason's first response was to refuse. What was the point? Michael Jackson wanted to meet a dancer, and Jason wasn't a dancer anymore. He was just a broken soldier in a wheelchair, a burden to everyone around him, a man whose best years were already behind him at 22. But his mother wouldn't take no for an answer. She called the number on the invitation, made the arrangements, and in September 1991, she wheeled her son through the gates of Neverland Ranch. The property was like nothing Jason had ever seen. Amusement park rides, a private zoo, gardens that seemed to stretch forever. It was a fantasy world, and Jason felt completely out of place in it, a damaged piece of military equipment that had accidentally ended up in paradise. Michael was waiting for them at the main house. He was smaller in person than Jason expected, quieter, with a soft voice and gentle eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Jason," Michael said, walking toward the wheelchair with his hand extended. "Thank you for coming." Jason shook Michael's hand but couldn't bring himself to speak. What was there to say? This was Michael Jackson, the man whose music had kept him alive in Kuwait. The man who had inspired a million moonwalks, including Jason's own amateur attempts in his Ohio bedroom. And now, Jason was sitting in front of him in a wheelchair, legless, useless, a shadow of the dancer he'd once dreamed of becoming. Michael didn't seem to notice Jason's discomfort. Or maybe he noticed and simply chose to ignore it. "Come with me," Michael said. "There's something I want to show you." Jason's mother wheeled him through the house, following Michael down long corridors decorated with art and gold records and photographs of performances. They passed a room filled with arcade games, a theater with plush red seats, a room that appeared to contain nothing but sequin gloves in glass cases. Finally, they reached a door that Michael opened with obvious anticipation. Inside was a dance studio. Mirrors on every wall, a professional sound system, a gleaming wooden floor, and in the center of the room, a space that had been cleared of all furniture. "This is where I practice," Michael said. "This is where the music becomes movement. And today, this is where you're going to dance." Jason stared at him. "I can't dance," he said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. He'd barely spoken in months. "I don't have legs anymore. I can't even stand up." Michael didn't seem surprised by the response. He walked to the center of the room and turned to face Jason, his expression calm and serious. "I didn't say walk with me. I said dance with me. Dancing isn't about legs, Jason. It's about feeling the music. It's about letting something beautiful move through you. Your legs are gone, but your soul isn't. And I want to dance with your soul." For a long moment, Jason didn't respond. Couldn't respond. No one had talked to him like this since his injury. Everyone else spoke in terms of limitations, adjustments, new realities, learning to accept what he'd lost. Michael was talking about what he still had. "I don't know how," Jason finally said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I don't know how to dance without legs. I don't know how to be me without legs. I don't know how to do anything anymore." Michael walked closer until he was standing directly in front of Jason's wheelchair. Then, slowly, he knelt down so they were eye to eye. "When I was a little boy," Michael said quietly, "my father used to beat me before performances. He said pain made me dance better. For years, I believed that dancing came from fear, from pain, from being forced to move whether I wanted to or not. But then I realized something. The dancing wasn't coming from the fear. It was coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere my father couldn't touch. The music lived inside me, Jason. It still lives inside you. Your legs didn't hold the music. Your heart does. And your heart is still beating." Jason felt something crack inside him, something he'd been holding together through sheer force of will since waking up in that German hospital. The wall he'd built around his emotions began to crumble. "I'm scared," Jason whispered. "I'm scared that if I try to dance and I can't, I'll have nothing left. Dancing was who I was. Without it, I don't know who I am." Michael reached out and took Jason's hand. "Then let's find out together. Let's see who you are now. It might be different than who you were, but different isn't always worse. Sometimes different is just different, and sometimes different is better than you could have imagined." Michael stood up and walked to the sound system. He pressed a button, and the opening notes of "Man in the Mirror" filled the studio, the song that had kept Jason alive in Kuwait. The song he hadn't been able to listen to since losing his legs, because it reminded him too much of everything he'd lost. "Close your eyes," Michael said, returning to stand in front of Jason's wheelchair. "Don't think about legs. Don't think about what you can't do. Just feel the music. Let it move through you. Let your body respond however it wants to respond." Jason closed his eyes. The familiar melody washed over him like a wave. And for the first time since the explosion, He let himself feel it, really feel it, not as a reminder of loss, but as what it had always been: a lifeline, a connection to something beautiful, a reason to keep going. His head started to move first, just a gentle bob, following the rhythm. Then his shoulders, his arms, his hands began to gesture, tracing patterns in the air, moving with the music the way they used to move when his whole body could join in. And somewhere in the middle of that song, Jason Miller started to cry. Not the silent, suppressed tears he'd been holding back for months. Real tears, loud, ugly, healing tears that shook his entire body. Tears for his legs, for his dreams, for the dancer he'd been, and the dancer he thought he'd never be again. Michael didn't try to stop him, didn't offer empty comfort. He just started dancing next to Jason's wheelchair, his own movements complementing Jason's, showing him that they could move together, even if they were moving differently. When the song ended, Jason's face was wet and his arms were tired, and something fundamental had shifted inside him. That was dancing, Michael said softly. That was your soul moving to music. And it was beautiful. Jason stayed at Neverland for 2 weeks. Every day, he and Michael would go to the dance studio. Every day, they would explore what movement meant when it wasn't dependent on legs. Michael showed Jason how to express rhythm with his upper body, how to tell a story with his hands, how to let the music flow through whatever parts of him still worked. It wasn't the dancing Jason had done before. It couldn't be, but it was still dancing, still expression, still a connection between body and music that Jason had thought was lost forever. On the last day of his visit, Michael brought Jason to a small stage in Neverland's private theater. I want to show you something, Michael said. He wheeled Jason to the center of the stage, positioned him under a spotlight, and then walked to the wings. Music started playing, Man in the Mirror again, but this time Michael didn't join Jason on stage. Dance for me, Michael called from the wings. Dance like no one's watching. Dance like you did in Kuwait, in your foxhole, with your Walkman. Dance like the music is the only thing that matters. Jason hesitated for only a moment. Then he closed his eyes and let the music take him. For 4 minutes and 55 seconds, Jason Miller danced on that stage. His wheelchair became part of the performance, spinning and rolling as his arms painted stories in the air. His head, his shoulders, his hands, everything moved with the music, expressing joy and pain and hope and grief and survival. When the song ended, Jason opened his eyes. Michael was standing in the wings, tears streaming down his face. That, Michael said, is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Jason returned home to Ohio a different person than the broken soldier who had arrived at Neverland 2 weeks earlier. He still had dark days, still struggled with depression, still grieved for the legs and the life he'd lost, but he also had something new, a belief that he could still dance, that the music hadn't left him, that his soul was still capable of moving to rhythm, even if his body moved differently now. With Michael's encouragement and financial support, Jason began developing a new form of dance, wheelchair choreography that incorporated upper body movement, chair spins, and emotional expression. He performed at veterans' hospitals, showing other wounded soldiers that disability didn't mean the end of self-expression. He taught workshops for amputees, sharing what Michael had taught him about finding new ways to move. In 1994, Jason performed on stage at a charity event in Los Angeles. Michael Jackson introduced him personally, telling the audience about the letter from Kuwait and the dance at Neverland. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes, almost as long as Man in the Mirror itself. Michael and Jason remained close until Michael's death in 2009. They talked on the phone regularly. Michael visited Jason whenever he was in Ohio. And every year, on March 3, the anniversary of the explosion that took Jason's legs, Michael would call to remind Jason that losing his legs had not made him less of a dancer. It had made him a different kind of dancer, a pioneering dancer, a dancer who showed the world that movement was about soul, not limbs. When Michael died, Jason was devastated. He'd lost not just a friend, but the person who had saved his life twice, once with a song in Kuwait, and again with a dance lesson at Neverland. At Michael's memorial service, Jason was invited to speak. He wheeled himself to the microphone in front of thousands of mourners and millions of television viewers. In 1991, Jason said, "I wrote Michael a letter from a war zone. I told him his music was keeping me human in hell." He wrote back, but he didn't just write back. He brought me to his home, looked at my wheelchair, and said 5 words that changed my life. "I want to dance with your soul." Jason paused, composing himself. "Michael Jackson taught me that dancing isn't about legs. It's about letting the music move through whatever parts of you still work. He taught me that disability doesn't mean inability. He taught me that the soul doesn't need legs to dance. And for that lesson, I will be grateful every day for the rest of my life." Today, Jason Miller is 56 years old. He runs a nonprofit organization called Souls Dance that provides dance therapy and wheelchair choreography training to wounded veterans and disabled individuals. He has trained over 3,000 people to discover that they can still dance, still move, still express themselves through music regardless of what parts of their bodies work or don't work. In his office, Jason keeps 3 things framed on the wall. The first is his Purple Heart Medal, awarded for wounds received in combat. The second is the letter he wrote to Michael Jackson from Kuwait in 1991, returned to him by Michael with a note that said, "Keep this. It saved both of us." The third is a photograph from that day in Neverland's dance studio. Michael Jackson and Jason Miller, side by side, arms raised in identical poses, one standing and one in a wheelchair, both dancing. The inscription on the frame reads, "The music isn't in your legs, it's in your soul." And souls don't need legs to dance. Sometimes the songs that save us in war can save us again in peace. Sometimes the people we write letters to actually read them. And sometimes the greatest dancers aren't the ones with the best moves, they're the ones who keep moving no matter what. Jason Miller lost his legs in Iraq, but he found something more important at Neverland Ranch. He found the truth that Michael Jackson had known all along, that dancing is what happens when you let the music inside you become visible, and that can happen in a wheelchair just as easily as on 2 feet. The music doesn't care what body it moves through, it only cares that it moves.